I want to tell you something that took me decades to understand, something that once changed the entire course of my life and the lives of thousands who've listened to me over the years. 3 days. That's all it takes to shift your entire reality when you know how to properly speak to your subconscious mind. Not 3 months, not 3 years, 3 days. And I know you're skeptical because you should be. You've tried visualization before. You've sat there, eyes closed, picturing what you want, feeling foolish, wondering if you're doing it right, and then nothing happened. Or worse, the opposite happened. You visualized money and got a bill. You visualized love and felt more alone. You visualized health and caught a cold, so you stopped. You decided it was nonsense, wishful thinking, something for naive people who don't understand how the real world works. But let me ask you something. What if the reason it didn't work wasn't because visualization is false, but because you were doing it backwards? What if you were actually programming your subconscious mind for failure while thinking you were programming it for success? Stay with me, because what I'm about to share with you isn't theory. This is the exact method I used when I was broke, alone, and desperate in a small room in Los Angeles, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving everything behind to pursue this understanding of the mind. This is what I taught to the woman who was scheduled for surgery, given 2 weeks to prepare, and who walked into that hospital completely healed, with her doctors speechless, holding X-rays they couldn't explain. This is what the businessman used when his company was 48 hours from bankruptcy, and by day 3, received a phone call that saved everything. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm here to show you exactly what they did, exactly what I did, and exactly what happens inside your subconscious mind during these 3 days that makes this method so remarkably different from everything else you've tried. Because once you understand this, once you really see how your mind actually works, you'll never look at your circumstances the same way again. Let me tell you what most people get wrong about manifestation right from the start. They think it's about forcing something. They think it's about straining, pushing, manipulating reality into submission. I see them squeezing their eyes shut, clenching their fists, trying to mentally strong-arm the universe into giving them what they want. That's not how this works. That's actually the opposite of how this works. Your subconscious mind doesn't respond to force. It responds to impression. There's a massive difference between those two approaches, and understanding this difference is the first key that unlocks everything else. Think about how a photograph is developed. You don't force the image onto the paper. You don't wrestle with it or demand it appear. You expose the paper to light, and the image emerges naturally, inevitably, according to precise laws. The paper has no choice but to accept the impression it receives. Your subconscious mind works exactly the same way. It accepts impressions. It doesn't argue, doesn't question, doesn't debate whether something is possible or impossible. It simply accepts what you impress upon it and begins immediately to express that impression as your experience. Now here's where most methods fail you completely. They give you a technique, sure. They tell you to visualize or affirm or write things down, but they leave out the most critical element. They don't tell you how to actually create a deep, lasting impression on your subconscious mind. They don't explain why you can repeat an affirmation 1,000 times and feel absolutely nothing change. You know this frustration intimately, don't you? You've said the words, you've made the vision boards, you've done the gratitude journals, and sometimes maybe you feel a little spark of hope. But then you open your eyes, look at your bank account, look at your circumstances, and that hope just evaporates like morning mist. That's because you were working on the surface. You were scratching at the door of your subconscious mind instead of actually walking through it. The 3-day method works differently because it's designed specifically to penetrate that door. It's designed to slip past your conscious doubts and embed itself directly into the fertile soil of your subconscious where real transformation happens. Now let me walk you through exactly how this method works, step by step, so you can begin using it tonight. The beauty of the 3-day method is in its elegant simplicity. You don't need candles, crystals, or complicated rituals. You don't need to sit in meditation for hours. All you need is 3 consecutive days, a few minutes each evening, and the willingness to suspend your disbelief. Here's what you do. Choose one desire. Just one. Don't scatter your mental energy across 10 different goals. The subconscious mind responds to focused intention, not to a shopping list of demands. Pick the one thing that would transform your life most significantly right now. Maybe it's financial abundance. Maybe it's perfect health. Maybe it's the ideal relationship or the career breakthrough you've been waiting for. Once you've identified your desire, craft a short statement in the present tense as if it's already accomplished. Not "I will have" or "I want to have," but "I am" or "I have." This isn't semantics. This is the language of the subconscious. Your deeper mind doesn't operate in future tense. It only knows now. So you might say, "I am abundantly prosperous," or "I am radiantly healthy," or "I am living in my dream home." Keep this statement simple. Make it feel natural when you say it. If it feels forced or fake, adjust the wording until it resonates. The feeling behind the words is what carries them into your subconscious. This is where most people stumble. They repeat affirmations mechanically, like robots reading from a script, and then wonder why nothing changes. Your subconscious doesn't respond to empty words. It responds to feeling, to emotion, to the conviction behind what you're saying. Now here's the technique itself. For 3 consecutive nights, just before sleep, you're going to enter a relaxed, drowsy state. Lie in bed comfortably. Close your eyes. Take a few deep breaths and let your body sink into the mattress. Feel yourself becoming heavy, relaxed, peaceful. This twilight state between waking and sleeping is called the hypnagogic state, and it's the golden gateway to your subconscious mind. In this drowsy, peaceful state, your conscious mind, with all its doubts, fears, and logical objections, begins to step aside. The critical factor, that gatekeeper that normally says, "Impossible, too good to be true," or "Who are you kidding?" relaxes its grip. And when that happens, your subconscious mind becomes beautifully receptive, like soil that's been freshly tilled and watered, ready to receive the seeds you plant. This is why I've always emphasized doing this work at night, right before sleep. Not because there's anything magical about nighttime itself, but because you're naturally entering this highly suggestible state. You're not fighting against the current, you're flowing with it. Now, here's what you need to understand about the subconscious mind. It doesn't argue. It doesn't debate. It doesn't say, "Let me think about that and get back to you." The subconscious mind accepts what you impress upon it as true, and then it sets about making it real in your experience. It's impersonal. It will work just as hard to make you sick as it will to make you healthy, depending on what you've convinced it of. I knew a woman in Los Angeles, a school teacher, who came to one of my lectures absolutely convinced she would never marry. "I'm too old," she told me. She was 37. "All the good men are taken. I'm set in my ways. It's just not in the cards for me." Every night, she fell asleep rehearsing these limitations, impressing them deeper and deeper into her subconscious mind. And sure enough, her outer world reflected this inner conviction perfectly. She remained alone, not because of her age or circumstances, but because her subconscious was faithfully executing the orders she gave it. After our conversation, she began a new practice. Every night, in that drowsy state before sleep, she would simply feel what it would be like to be happily married. Not desperately wanting it, not begging for it, but feeling the naturalness of it, the warmth of companionship, the joy of sharing life with someone. She didn't visualize a specific face or force details. She just accepted the feeling of her wish fulfilled. Within 4 months, she met a widower at a friend's dinner party. They were married within the year. When she told me about it, she said something I'll never forget. It felt so natural when it happened, like I'd been expecting him all along. That's the subconscious at work. Your conscious mind may have forgotten what you impressed upon your subconscious, but your subconscious never forgets. It keeps working, keeps arranging, keeps drawing the necessary circumstances into your life until the manifestation appears. This is why persistence is so vital. Most people give up just before the breakthrough. They plant the seed, they water it for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, and then they dig it up to see if it's growing. And when they don't see immediate results, they abandon the whole process and declare that it doesn't work. But the law doesn't stop working just because you stop believing. The sun doesn't stop shining because you close your eyes. The only question is whether you're impressing your subconscious with what you want or what you fear. I knew a salesman once who was struggling terribly. Every morning he would look at his empty appointment book and think, another slow day ahead. Nobody's buying right now. He would say to his wife, times are tough. I don't know how we're going to make it this month. And month after month, his prophecy came true. His sales remained dismal. He blamed the economy, the competition, the product, everything except his own mental conditioning. When he came to me, I asked him one simple question. What do you think about before you make your sales calls? He was honest. He said, I think about how many people are going to say no. I think about how hard it is to close a deal right now. There was the problem laid bare. Every day, he was impressing his subconscious mind with images of failure and rejection. And his subconscious, being the faithful servant it is, was bringing those images into his reality. It instructed him to change his inner dialogue completely. Before every sales call, he was to spend 5 minutes in his car, eyes closed, imagining the prospect saying yes. He was to feel the handshake, hear the words, let's move forward, see himself writing up the order. He was skeptical, but desperate enough to try. Within 2 weeks, his closing rate doubled. Within 2 months, he was the top salesman in his district. His circumstances hadn't changed. The economy was the same. The product was the same. The only thing that changed was the impression he was making on his subconscious mind. He wasn't lying to himself. He wasn't pretending the problem didn't exist. He was simply refusing to give the problem his emotional agreement. And within 30 days, his sales began to climb. Within 60 days, he was back at the top of his division. Nothing outside of him had changed. Everything inside of him had. You see, most people think faith is something you have to work up, something you have to strain for, something reserved for the spiritually gifted. But that's not faith at all. That's effort. That's struggle. And struggle is just another form of doubt. Real faith is natural. It's effortless. It's the quiet knowing that what you've claimed in consciousness must appear in your world. Think of a seed planted in the ground. Does it struggle to become a tree? Does it worry whether it has what it takes? Does it look at other seeds and feel inadequate? No, it simply does what seeds do. It responds to the law of its own being, and you are no different. When you plant an impression in your subconscious mind, you've activated a law as reliable as the law that turns seeds into trees. You don't have to make it work. You don't have to help it along. You simply have to stop digging it up with doubt. I once spoke with a woman who told me she had been affirming prosperity for years with no result. Years. She had said her affirmations faithfully, morning and night. She had visualized. She had prayed. And nothing had changed. So I asked her a simple question. When you finish your affirmations, what do you think about? She paused. Then she said, well, I suppose I start worrying about the bills again. There it was. She was planting seeds in the morning and pouring poison on them by noon. She was impressing her subconscious with wealth and then immediately impressing it with lack. And the subconscious, being utterly impersonal, simply accepted the last and strongest impression. You see, this is where most people fail, not because the law doesn't work, not because they're unlucky or cursed or somehow unworthy. They fail because they don't understand the absolute necessity of consistency. Your subconscious mind is like soil. It will grow whatever you plant in it. But here's what people don't realize. When you plant contradictory seeds, you don't get both crops. You get confusion. You get neutralization. You get nothing. I've watched this pattern repeat itself thousands of times. Someone will meditate on prosperity for 20 minutes in the morning. They'll visualize their ideal life. They'll affirm their abundance. And then, they'll spend the next 23 hours and 40 minutes worrying about money, complaining about bills, looking at their bank account with fear and dread. And they wonder why nothing changes. Let me be absolutely clear about this. The subconscious mind accepts the dominant impression, not the first one, not the most sincere one, the dominant one, the one you repeat most frequently with the most feeling. Think of it like this. Imagine you're trying to heat a pot of water to boiling. You turn on the flame for 5 minutes, then turn it off for an hour. Turn it on for 5 minutes, turn it off for an hour. Will that water ever boil? Of course not. You're not maintaining the heat long enough for it to build. That's exactly what happens when you affirm wealth in the morning and deny it all day. You're heating and cooling, heating and cooling. You never build momentum. You never reach the tipping point where your new impression becomes permanent. Now, I'm not saying you need to be perfect. I'm not saying you can never have a doubtful thought. What I'm saying is that you must maintain the dominant mental atmosphere. Your prevailing mood must align with what you want to experience. When a negative thought comes up, and it will, you don't fight it. You don't give it power by resisting it. You simply redirect your attention. You gently return to your chosen state. Again and again, as many times as necessary. This is the work. This is the practice. Not some mystical ritual performed once and forgotten, but a consistent returning to the truth of what you want to be. You may have noticed that I use the word practice deliberately, because that's what this is, a spiritual practice. Just as a musician practices scales, just as an athlete trains their body daily, you must train your consciousness to return, again and again, to the state you wish to embody. There will be moments when the evidence of your senses screams at you, when your bank account contradicts your assumption of wealth, when your body protests against your assumption of health, when the empty space beside you mocks your assumption of love. These are the moments that test you. These are the moments where most people abandon their assumption and return to the prison of their former state. But I'm asking you to do something radical. I'm asking you to persist in spite of the evidence, to dare to assume you are what you want to be, even when every physical fact seems to deny it. This is not delusion. This is not pretending. This is understanding a fundamental law. Consciousness is the only reality, and the outer world must eventually conform to the inner state you persist in. Think of it this way. When you plant a seed in the ground, you don't dig it up every day to see if it's growing. You trust the process, you water it, you give it sunlight, and you wait with the quiet confidence that nature will do what nature does. Your assumption is that seed, your persistence is the watering, and the harvest is inevitable if you don't uproot it with doubt. I've watched people achieve the most remarkable transformations by simply refusing to abandon their assumption. A woman who assumed she was happily married when she was single and lonely. She didn't force anything, she didn't chase anyone. She simply lived from that assumption, felt from it, acted from it. And within months, circumstances rearranged themselves in ways she could never have orchestrated consciously. A man who assumed he was successful in business when he was bankrupt and broken, he didn't know how it would happen. He couldn't see the path. But he maintained that inner conviction, and opportunity found him in the most unexpected ways. The man who declared he would find his life partner, everyone around him said his standards were too high, his expectations unrealistic. They showed him statistics, reminded him of his age, pointed out his limited social circle, but he refused to accept their verdict. Every night before sleep, he would feel the joy of companionship. He would sense the warmth of mutual understanding. He didn't visualize a face or force details. He simply inhabited the feeling of having found his perfect match. 3 months passed. Nothing changed externally. His friends grew more insistent that he lower his expectations, but internally, his conviction only deepened. Then his company sent him to a conference he initially didn't want to attend. A last-minute flight change seated him next to someone who became his closest friend. That friend, 6 months later, invited him to a small gathering where he met the woman who would become his wife. Not through desperate searching, not through lowering standards, but through maintaining the inner assumption while remaining open to how it would manifest. You see, your subconscious mind is infinitely more intelligent than your conscious planning. It can arrange circumstances, orchestrate meetings, and create pathways that your rational mind could never conceive. But it needs one thing from you: your unwavering faith in the invisible reality of your fulfilled desire. This is not blind optimism. This is scientific faith based on understanding how consciousness operates. Your subconscious mind is connected to infinite intelligence. It has access to information and possibilities beyond your conscious awareness. When you impress it with a clear feeling, when you persist in that inner conviction, regardless of outer appearances, you set in motion forces that must produce corresponding effects. The woman who assumed health while bedridden, the man who claimed wealth while bankrupt, the person who felt love while lonely, they all understood this one crucial principle. The outer world is simply the shadow. The inner world is the substance. Change the substance and the shadow must follow. But here's what stops most people. They try it for a few days. They hold the feeling, they maintain the assumption, they do everything right, and then they check the outer world for confirmation. And when they don't see immediate results, they panic. They say, "See, it doesn't work. I tried, and nothing happened." But here's what they don't understand. They broke the circuit before the current could flow. You see, assumption isn't something you test. It's something you live. When you truly assume something, you don't look for proof. The assumption itself is your proof. The person who assumes they are healthy doesn't check their body every 5 minutes for signs of healing. They simply live as a healthy person lives. Think about how you assume the sun will rise tomorrow. Do you go to bed tonight checking, wondering, doubting whether dawn will come? Do you set your alarm and think, "Well, I hope the sun shows up, but I'm not sure"? Of course not. You don't even think about it. It's such a deep assumption that it requires zero effort, zero checking, zero concern. That's the level of naturalness we're aiming for with our desires. Not forced belief, not white-knuckled faith, just quiet, natural assumption. The kind that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. But most people, when they first hear this teaching, they approach it with desperation. They're coming from lack. They're coming from fear. They're coming from a place that says, "I need this to work because my current reality is unbearable." And that very energy, that desperate need for it to work, is itself an assumption of lack. You cannot assume wealth from poverty consciousness. You cannot assume love from loneliness consciousness. You cannot assume health from sickness consciousness. The very act of desperately trying to change something confirms that you assume it is as it appears to be. This is why so many fail. They use these techniques as a Hail Mary pass, a last-ditch effort to escape their current circumstances. But the law doesn't respond to your effort. It responds to your assumption. And if your assumption is, "I'm desperate, and this has to work or else," well, that's an assumption of desperation, not fulfillment. The people who succeed with this law are the ones who shift their inner state first, regardless of outer conditions. Now you might be wondering, how do I shift my inner state when everything around me screams the opposite? This is where most people stumble. They wait for the evidence before they shift. They say, "Show me the money, then I'll feel abundant. Give me the relationship, then I'll feel loved. Heal my body, then I'll feel well." But that's backwards. That's living from the outside in. And the outside world? It's always going to reflect yesterday's consciousness. What you're seeing right now is old news. It's the echo of who you were, not who you're becoming. The shift happens when you dare to feel the feeling first, when you close your eyes and enter into the state of the wish fulfilled not as a technique, not as a manipulation, but as a choice, a deliberate choice to dwell in the feeling of your desire being already accomplished. Let me give you an example that might hit home. A woman once came to me, drowning in debt. She couldn't sleep. Every morning began with anxiety. Every bill was a reminder of failure. And she prayed, she prayed hard, but her prayers were soaked in fear. "Please help me get out of debt. Please, God, I can't take this anymore." I asked her a simple question. "How would you feel if you woke up tomorrow and all your debts were paid?" She paused. Her eyes softened. "I'd feel free, light, like I could breathe again." I said, "Then that's your work. Not to beg, not to plead, but to assume the feeling of freedom now. Live from that place. Act as the woman who is already free. She resisted at first. But Joseph, the bills are still here. The creditors are still calling. How can I pretend everything's fine? I told her, I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to claim the state that produces the result. The bills will change when you change. The outer world has no choice but to conform. Within weeks, unexpected money came. A forgotten refund. A freelance opportunity. Small things at first, then larger. But the real miracle, she stopped being a victim to her circumstances. She became the operant power in her own life. And isn't that what we're all seeking? Not to control others, not to manipulate outcomes, but to stop feeling like life is something that happens to us and start experiencing life as something that happens through us. That's the shift Murphy is inviting you to make. Because here's what most people don't understand about imagination. It's not separate from reality. It's not just imagination versus real life. Your imagination is where reality is formed. Every single thing you see around you right now. The chair you're sitting in, the device you're watching this on, the building you're inside. All of it existed first as an image in someone's mind. The Wright brothers imagined flight before they ever left the ground. Steve Jobs imagined a computer that anyone could use before the Macintosh existed. Every relationship you have, every conversation you've experienced, it began as a thought, an intention, an imagined possibility. Murphy understood that imagination isn't the opposite of reality, it's the womb of reality. And when you really grasp this, when you stop treating your inner world as less real than your outer world, everything changes. Because you realize the version of yourself you imagine, the life you imagine, the feelings you imagine, they're not fantasies you're escaping into. They're blueprints you're building from. Murphy would say it this way: assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Not someday, not when circumstances change, not when you deserve it. Now. Because your subconscious mind doesn't differentiate between a vividly imagined experience and a physically lived one. Think about that. When you imagine biting into a lemon right now, really imagine it. The sour juice hitting your tongue. Your mouth begins to water. Your body responds to the image as if it's real. That's not magic. That's how you're designed. Your nervous system responds to imagination. Your emotions respond to imagination. Your entire biology responds to imagination. And according to Murphy, so does the creative force that organizes your life. When you imagine something with feeling, with the emotional conviction that it's real, you activate the same creative mechanism that beats your heart and heals your wounds. You don't have to know how it will happen. You don't have to figure out every step. You just have to feel it as done. Your subconscious mind is the architect. Your conscious mind is simply the one who places the order. When you place an order at a restaurant, you don't go into the kitchen and tell the chef how to chop the vegetables, how hot to set the stove, or which pan to use. You trust the process. You trust the expertise. You sit down, you order, and you expect it to be delivered. This is the relationship you must have with your subconscious. You impress it with the feeling of the wish fulfilled, and then you let it work. It has access to infinite intelligence. It knows paths and possibilities you cannot see with your limited conscious awareness. It will orchestrate circumstances, arrange meetings, bring ideas into your mind, and open doors you didn't even know existed. But here's what most people do instead. They impress the desire, they feel it for a moment, and then immediately they start worrying. How will this happen? Where will the money come from? What if it doesn't work? And in that moment of doubt, they impress the opposite. They cancel out their own order. Imagine walking into that restaurant, ordering a beautiful meal, and then 5 minutes later running into the kitchen shouting, "Never mind, I don't think you can make it. I don't deserve it. It's probably not coming." You would never do that. Yet this is exactly what people do with their subconscious mind every single day. The key is persistence in the assumption. You assume it is done. You feel it is done. And when doubt creeps in, and it will, you gently return to the feeling. You don't fight the doubt. You don't wrestle with it. You simply redirect your attention back to the wish fulfilled, back to the feeling, back to the state of already having it. Think of it like tuning a radio. If you're trying to listen to a station at 101,5 FM, you don't tune to 95,3 and then get angry that you're hearing the wrong program. You simply adjust the dial. You tune back to 101,5. No drama. No frustration. Just a gentle, persistent return to the frequency you want. Your feelings are your tuning mechanism. When you feel doubt, fear, or lack, you're tuned to the wrong station. You're broadcasting and receiving from the frequency of what you don't want. But when you return to the feeling of the wish, fulfilled, to gratitude, to satisfaction, to joy, you're back on the right frequency. Think of your life as a garden. Every thought is a seed. Every feeling waters that seed. If you plant seeds of fear and water them with anxiety, what do you think will grow? More fear, more anxiety. If you plant seeds of abundance and water them with gratitude, you will harvest abundance. You cannot plant thorns and expect roses. You cannot dwell in defeat and expect victory. The universe doesn't judge your desires, it simply reflects back to you the nature of your inner conversations and feelings. This is why I've always said, change your inner conversation and you change your entire world. What are you saying to yourself when no one else is listening? What story are you rehearsing in the privacy of your own mind? Because that story, repeated with feeling, becomes your reality. Most people are their own worst enemy. They sabotage themselves with their inner dialogue. They say, I'll never get ahead. I'm not lucky. Things never work out for me. And then they wonder why life seems so hard. They've cursed themselves with their own words, their own mental images. But you have the power to bless yourself instead. You can craft a new inner conversation right now. You can decide that from this moment forward, you will only speak to yourself as you would speak to someone you deeply love and believe in. Tell yourself, everything is working out for me. I am guided. I am blessed. Wonderful things are unfolding in my life. Say it until it feels natural. Say it until doubt loses its grip. Your subconscious doesn't argue. It doesn't question. It simply accepts what you consistently impress upon it. If you tell it you are successful, healthy, and prosperous with conviction and feeling, it will move heaven and earth to make that your reality. The outer world has no power over you unless you give it that power. Circumstances are effects, not causes. The real cause is always within, in your consciousness, in your assumptions, in your habitual feeling state. Every single thing that shows up in your life, every person, every opportunity, every so-called obstacle, is a reflection of what you've been dwelling upon in consciousness. This is why two people can live in the same city, work in the same field, have similar education, and yet have completely different experiences. One prospers while the other struggles. One finds love while the other finds rejection. One sees opportunity everywhere while the other sees only closed doors. The difference is never in the circumstances, the difference is in consciousness. You see, most people look at their current reality and use it as the reason for their feeling state. I'll feel successful when I have money. I'll feel loved when I meet the right person. I'll feel confident when I lose weight. This is backwards living. This is trying to get the effect to produce the cause. Your feeling state must come first. The outer world is a mirror, it can only reflect back what you bring to it. If you wait for the mirror to smile before you smile, you'll wait forever. You must smile first, and then the reflection has no choice but to smile back. I've watched people transform their entire lives not by changing a single outer circumstance, but by changing their inner conversation. A woman who felt perpetually overlooked and undervalued began to practice feeling recognized and appreciated. She didn't wait for her boss to give her a promotion or her partner to show more affection. She simply began to feel these things within herself, regardless of outer confirmation. Within weeks, everything shifted. Her boss suddenly noticed her contributions. Her partner became more attentive. New opportunities appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Did the world suddenly change? No. She changed, and the world had no choice but to mirror that change back to her. This is the law at work. You cannot feel one way consistently and have life show you something different. It's impossible. The outer must conform to the inner. This is not philosophy, this is mechanism. This is how consciousness operates. So stop giving power to circumstances. Stop believing that your past determines your future or that your current situation has any authority over what you can experience next. The power is in you. It's always been in you. Your mind is not designed to keep you stuck. Your subconscious is not programmed to hold you back. It's programmed to accept. It accepts what you give it. Every thought you think repeatedly, every feeling you dwell in, every image you replay in your imagination, your subconscious absorbs it all, without judgment, without question, without resistance. And here's what most people don't realize. Your subconscious doesn't care whether what you're feeding it is true or false, helpful or harmful, empowering or destructive. It simply takes what you give it and begins to reproduce it in your external world. That's its job. That's its only job. So if you keep telling yourself, "I'm not good enough," your subconscious says, "Okay, let me show you more evidence of that." If you keep replaying scenarios of failure, rejection, or disappointment, your subconscious says, "Got it. Let me align your perception, your energy, and your behavior with that reality." But the moment you begin to shift what you're impressing upon your subconscious, the moment you begin to feed it images of success, feelings of worthiness, visions of abundance, it responds with the same obedience. It doesn't argue. It doesn't hesitate. It simply begins to align your inner world with what you're now affirming as true. This is why affirmation works, not because it's magic, not because words have mystical power floating in the air, but because repetition impresses the subconscious, and what is impressed upon the subconscious must be expressed in your experience. That is law. When you say, "I am confident," and you feel it, even for a moment, you are planting a seed. When you repeat it daily, you are watering that seed. And with time, consistency, and emotional conviction, that seed breaks through the soil of doubt and grows into a lived reality. But you must be persistent. You must be deliberate. You can't affirm abundance one day and then spend the next 7 days worrying about bills and expecting lack. That's like planting a garden and then pouring poison on it every evening. You can't build a new inner structure if you keep tearing it down with your words, your focus, and your feelings. Your subconscious doesn't judge whether your thoughts are constructive or destructive. It doesn't filter for truth or falsehood. It simply accepts what you impress upon it and proceeds to manifest the outer equivalent. This is why you must become the guardian of your inner temple. You must stand watch over what enters your mind the same way a loving parent protects their child from harm. And here's something most people never realize. Your subconscious is always listening, but it listens most intently during moments of emotional intensity. When you're anxious, angry, fearful, or deeply moved, your subconscious mind is wide open, absorbing every thought and image with extraordinary power. This is why a moment of panic can undo weeks of positive thinking. This is why one fearful visualization during a sleepless night can seem to manifest faster than a month of hopeful affirmations. The emotional charge behind your thoughts determines how deeply they penetrate your subconscious. A calm, repeated affirmation spoken with feeling will go deeper than 1,000 anxious repetitions spoken mechanically. This is the secret that transforms technique into power. You must feel the truth of what you're claiming. You must enter into the mood of the wish fulfilled. I learned this truth through countless examples. I've seen people whose lives transformed the moment they stopped fighting their circumstances and started saturating their minds with a new inner conviction. I've watched individuals rise from poverty, heal from illness, and restore broken relationships not through struggle, but through persistence in maintaining a new mental attitude. But I've also witnessed the opposite. I've seen people attend lectures, read books, learn the principles, and yet remain unchanged because they treated these truths as interesting philosophy rather than practical instruction. They collected knowledge but never applied it with consistency. They changed their thoughts on Sunday but returned to habitual negativity by Monday afternoon. The difference between those who succeed and those who fail is not intelligence, education, or even initial circumstances. The difference is constancy of mental application. The successful person maintains their new mental dwelling place regardless of what the outer world suggests. They understand that the lag between inner change and outer manifestation is a test of faith, not a sign of failure. This is perhaps the most crucial insight I can share with you. Your outer world is on a time delay. It's showing you the movie of yesterday's thoughts, last week's beliefs, last month's mental dwelling place. If you moved your physical residence from a basement apartment to a penthouse yesterday, you wouldn't expect everyone you meet today to still find you in the basement. Yet this is precisely what most people do mentally. They change their inner dwelling place for a day or two, then become discouraged when the outer world hasn't caught up, and they move right back to the old mental slum. I've watched this pattern destroy more dreams than any external obstacle ever could. Someone decides to dwell in abundance. For 3 days, they maintain this inner state beautifully. Then a bill arrives, an unexpected expense appears, and immediately they say, "See, it's not working. I'm still poor." And in that moment, they abandon their new mental home and rush back to the familiar poverty consciousness they've inhabited for years. But consider the absurdity of this. You wouldn't plant a seed on Monday and dig it up on Thursday because you don't see a tree yet. You wouldn't begin a journey of 1,000 miles and turn back after the first 10 steps because you haven't reached your destination. Yet in the mental realm, people expect instantaneous results and interpret any delay as denial. The truth is that the outer world is incredibly obedient. It is reflecting back to you with absolute precision. But what it's reflecting right now is where you were dwelling mentally days, weeks, or even months ago. There is always a lag time between cause and effect, between seed and harvest, between the invisible and the visible. This is why persistence in your new mental dwelling place is everything. You must be willing to maintain your new inner state long enough for the outer world to catch up. And here's what I've observed without exception. The moment you truly make your new mental dwelling place permanent, when you stop vacillating between the penthouse and the basement, when you refuse to return to the old state, no matter what evidence the sense is present, that's when the outer transformation accelerates dramatically. Think of it like learning to ride a bicycle. There's that critical moment when you finally find your balance, when you're no longer wobbling between falling left and falling right. Once you find that center point, that equilibrium, the ride becomes smooth. You're not thinking about balance anymore. You're simply riding. Your mental dwelling place works exactly the same way. There's a tipping point where your new state becomes your natural state, where you no longer have to consciously maintain it because it has become who you are. I've watched people struggle for months, constantly slipping back into their old mental patterns, and then suddenly, almost overnight, everything shifts. What changed? They finally stopped giving power to the contradictory evidence. They stopped checking the bank account every hour to see if the money had arrived. They stopped monitoring their body every morning to see if the healing had manifested. They stopped interrogating every date to see if this was the one. They simply lived from the assumption that it was already done. This is what I mean by dwelling. You're not visiting a nice mental state for a few minutes during meditation and then returning to your real state of lack for the other 23 hours of the day. You're establishing permanent residence in the state of the wish fulfilled. You're bringing all your belongings there. You're changing your mailing address. You're putting down roots. And here's something crucial that many people miss. Your new mental dwelling place doesn't require constant effort once it's truly established. In the beginning, yes, you must be vigilant. You must catch yourself when you start to slip into the old state. You must consciously redirect your thoughts, your internal conversations, your emotional responses. But this vigilancy is temporary. It's the scaffolding you use while building the new structure. Once the structure is solid, the scaffolding comes down. I remember a man who came to me desperate to change his financial situation. For weeks, he practiced what I taught him. He assumed the feeling of financial abundance. He imagined vividly the life he desired. But every few days, he would return to his old state of worry and lack, triggered by a bill or a financial news story or a comment from a well-meaning friend. Progress was slow because he was building and then tearing down, building and then tearing down. He never gave his subconscious enough uninterrupted time to accept the new blueprint. It's like planting a seed, watering it today, then digging it up tomorrow to check if it's growing, then replanting it, then digging it up again. You can't expect a harvest that way. Your subconscious mind needs consistency. It needs repetition. It needs you to hold the vision steady long enough for it to become impressed upon it, to become accepted as the new operating system. When you waver, when you doubt, when you return to the old mental patterns, you're essentially telling your subconscious, never mind, disregard that previous instruction, go back to the old way. And your subconscious, being the faithful servant that it is, will comply. It will return to manifesting the conditions that match your dominant mental attitude, which in this case remains one of lack and limitation. Think of a captain steering a ship. If he points the ship north for a few hours, then turns it south, then back north, then east, then west, constantly changing direction, that ship will never reach any destination. It will simply drift, making no real progress. But when the captain sets a course and maintains it, when he keeps his hand steady on the wheel despite storms and winds and waves, the ship will inevitably reach its port. You are the captain of your consciousness, and your dominant thoughts are the rudder that steers your life experience. The universe doesn't respond to your occasional positive thought, your Sunday affirmation, your monthly visualization. It responds to your habitual thinking, to the mental atmosphere you consistently dwell in, to the beliefs you hold most of the time. This is why I cannot stress enough the importance of mental discipline, not as a form of punishment or restriction, but as a form of focused power. When you discipline your mind to think in a certain way, when you guard your thoughts as you would guard precious treasure, you are directing the infinite creative power within you toward specific ends. The woman who healed herself of chronic pain did so because she maintained her mental vision of health for weeks without wavering. Even when the pain persisted, even when doctors offered no hope, even when her own body seemed to contradict her affirmation, she held steady. She didn't check the old blueprint every few days. She committed fully to the new one. And here's what happened. Within months, the tumors began to shrink. The medical community called it spontaneous remission. But there was nothing spontaneous about it. She had deliberately, consciously, persistently impressed a new pattern upon her subconscious mind. She had changed the blueprint. Now I want you to understand something crucial. This isn't about denying reality. This isn't about pretending things are fine when they're not. When you look at your current circumstances, your bank account, your health, your relationships, you're looking at old prints. You're looking at what your previous mental patterns have produced. The question isn't whether these circumstances are real. They are real. The question is, will you use them as evidence of what must continue, or will you recognize them as evidence of what was, and commit fully to impressing something new? Most people make their current conditions their dominant thought. They wake up, see the problem still there, and think about the problem all day long. Then they wonder why the problem persists. You're feeding it, you're watering it, you're giving it the very attention and emotional energy it needs to continue manifesting. Instead, you must become stubborn in your new assumption. When the old evidence presents itself, and it will you acknowledge it without giving it power. You say, that's the old pattern, that's yesterday's blueprint, I'm impressing a new one now. And you return, again and again, to the feeling of your wish fulfilled. This is where most people fail. They try the technique for a week, maybe two. They don't see immediate changes in the outer world, so they conclude it doesn't work. They go back to their old patterns of thought, their old conversations, their old assumptions. And of course, the old results continue. But what if you persisted for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What if you impressed the new pattern so deeply, so consistently, that your subconscious mind had no choice but to accept it as the dominant blueprint? I'm not speaking theoretically. I'm speaking from thousands of documented cases. I'm speaking from the fundamental principle of consciousness itself. Your subconscious mind doesn't argue. It doesn't judge whether your assumption is good or bad, true or false. It simply accepts what you persistently impress upon it and proceeds to externalize it in your world. This is why the person who constantly says, "I never have enough money," continues to experience lack. Their subconscious doesn't debate with them. It doesn't say, "Wait, let me check the facts." No. It accepts that dominant mental pattern and uses all of its power to make it real. It influences your decisions, your energy levels, your perception of opportunities, even the people you attract into your life. Conversely, the person who maintains the inner conviction, "I am always divinely supplied. Money flows to me easily and naturally," begins to see circumstances shift. Not because they're lucky, not because the universe suddenly favors them, but because their subconscious mind, accepting this new belief, begins to work in harmony with that assumption. Your outer world is a faithful mirror of your inner convictions. If you don't like what you see in the mirror, you don't try to change the reflection. You change yourself, and the reflection changes automatically. This is the secret that has been known by mystics, sages, and spiritual teachers throughout the ages. They called it by different names: faith, consciousness, mental attitude, state of being. But they all pointed to the same truth. What you assume to be true about yourself and your life tends to manifest in your experience. Now, I want to address something important. Some people hear this teaching and immediately think it means they should just imagine wonderful things while doing nothing. That's not what I'm saying. Assumption is not passive wishing. It's an active mental state that naturally compels you toward aligned action. When you truly assume something is yours, you behave differently. You think differently. You speak differently. Your entire being aligns with that assumption, and appropriate action flows naturally from that state of consciousness. The woman who assumes she is healthy doesn't need to force herself to make healthy choices. Those choices flow naturally from her assumption. The man who assumes he is confident doesn't have to pretend. His assumption generates genuine confidence from within. You see, this is why affirmations alone often fail. When someone stands in front of a mirror saying, "I am wealthy, I am wealthy," while their inner assumption screams, "I'm broke and desperate," they're building a house on quicksand. The words contradict the feeling. The conscious statement fights against the subconscious assumption, and the subconscious always wins that battle. But when you change the assumption first, everything shifts. You don't need to force positive thoughts because they arise naturally from your new foundation. You don't need to fight against doubt because doubt cannot exist where certainty lives. You don't need to convince yourself of anything because you already know it to be true. I've watched people transform their entire lives by changing just one core assumption. A woman came to me once, struggling in every area: finances, relationships, health. We didn't try to fix each problem separately. We went to the root. Her fundamental assumption was, life is against me. I'm not meant to have good things. Can you imagine trying to build success on that foundation? It's impossible. Every opportunity that came her way, her assumption interpreted as a trap. Every success felt temporary, waiting to be taken away. Every relationship seemed destined to fail, not because life was actually against her, but because her assumption colored everything she experienced. We worked on changing that one belief, not through force, not through repetition of hollow words, but through feeling. She practiced assuming life supports me. Good things flow naturally to me. She dwelled in that feeling, especially in the state between waking and sleeping, when the subconscious is most receptive. Within weeks, everything changed. The same world that seemed hostile now appeared friendly. The same circumstances that felt limiting now revealed opportunities. Nothing in her external world had changed yet, but everything in her experience had transformed because her assumption had transformed. And then, as naturally as water flowing downhill, her external world began to match her internal assumption. Better opportunities appeared. Relationships improved. Her health strengthened. Not through struggle, but through alignment. This is the power you have within you right now. Your assumptions are creating your world this very moment, and you can change them. You can choose, right now, to assume something different, to feel something different, to be something different. And that choice, that single, quiet choice, is where everything begins. Not in some distant future, where circumstances finally align. Not when you've gathered enough evidence or convinced enough doubters. Right here, in this eternal now, where all power resides. I once knew a woman who lived her entire adult life believing she was artistically talentless. Her father had laughed at her drawings when she was 8 years old, and she carried that moment like a stone in her pocket for 4 decades. She would see art galleries and feel that familiar the longing mixed with the certainty that such expression was not for people like her. But one afternoon, sitting in her kitchen with nothing but time and a stubborn curiosity, she picked up a pencil, not to become an artist, not to prove anything, simply because something in her refused to die quietly. She drew for an hour, then another. The drawings were clumsy, yes, but something happened that she hadn't expected. She felt alive. More alive than she'd felt in 20 years of productive work. Within 6 months, she was selling her pieces. Within a year, teaching others. Not because she suddenly discovered hidden talent, but because she finally withdrew her agreement with the old story. She stopped energizing the belief that she was incapable and began nourishing a different assumption entirely. Your subconscious doesn't care which story you feed it. It will manifest whatever you persistently assume to be true. It's completely impartial, like soil that will grow weeds just as readily as roses, depending entirely on what seeds you plant. This is why blame is such a comfortable trap. As long as you can point to external causes, to parents, partners, the economy, your genetics, your past mistakes, you maintain the illusion that you're powerless. And powerlessness, strangely enough, feels safe. It requires nothing of you. It asks for no change, no risk, no uncomfortable growth. But the moment you accept that your assumptions create your reality, that safety dissolves. Suddenly, you're standing in a field of infinite possibility with no one to hide behind. And that's terrifying. Because now you must choose. You must decide who you want to be, what you want to experience, how you want to feel. You can't outsource that responsibility anymore. But here's what makes it bearable, more than bearable, actually exhilarating. You don't have to make the perfect choice. You just have to make a choice. Any choice that feels more true, more aligned, more like the person you wish to become. Because here's the truth that nobody tells you when you're paralyzed by indecision. The universe doesn't reward perfect plans, it rewards movement. It rewards the courage to take a step even when you can't see the entire staircase. I think about this every time I meet someone stuck in analysis paralysis, drowning in research, waiting for absolute certainty before they act. They're waiting for a sign, for permission, for the stars to align. And meanwhile, life is passing them by at an alarming speed. The person who tries and adjusts beats the person who waits and perfects, every single time. Your subconscious mind doesn't respond to perfect strategies written in notebooks. It responds to committed action, to decisions made with your whole heart, even if your head isn't 100% certain. Think about the last truly transformative moment in your life. I'm willing to bet it didn't happen because you finally figured everything out. It happened because you finally stopped trying to figure everything out and just moved. That job that changed your career trajectory, you probably didn't meet every single qualification, but you applied anyway. That relationship that opened your heart, you probably had doubts and fears, but you showed up anyway. That creative project that brought you alive, you probably had no idea if anyone would care, but you created it anyway. Anyway. That's the magic word. The word that transforms waiting into living. And here's what happens when you operate from this place. You stop asking, what's the right choice? And start asking, what choice can I make right now that moves me forward? That subtle shift changes everything. Because forward momentum creates its own clarity. You can't steer a parked car, but once you're moving, even slowly, you can adjust direction. You can course correct. you can pivot. The subconscious mind loves this. It interprets movement as commitment. And commitment activates all those invisible forces. We talked about the intuition, the synchronicities, the opportunities that seem to appear out of nowhere. So if you're standing at a crossroads right now, waiting for cosmic confirmation before you choose a path, let me offer you this. Choose. Just choose. Pick the option that resonates even slightly more than the others and commit to making it work. Because here's what happens when you choose and commit. The universe doesn't sit back and judge your choice. It doesn't dock you points for picking the wrong door. Instead, it watches you choose door number 1, and then it gets to work helping you discover what's behind it. And if what's behind door number 1 turns out not to be what you wanted, you haven't failed. You've gathered information. You've learned something crucial about yourself, about your desires, about what does and doesn't resonate with your deeper purpose. And now you're equipped to make your next choice from a place of greater wisdom. The people who seem to have incredible intuition, who always seem to make the right decisions, they're not accessing some mystical knowledge you don't have. They've simply practiced making decisions and living with them. They've built trust with themselves. They know that whatever they choose, they'll figure it out. Your subconscious mind doesn't require perfect conditions to work on your behalf. It doesn't need you to have all the answers before it can deliver solutions. In fact, it works best when you're in motion, when you're actively engaged with life, when you're making choices and taking steps, even imperfect ones. Think about learning to drive a car. When you're parked, you have complete control. Zero risk of an accident, but you're also going absolutely nowhere. The steering wheel doesn't even work when you're stationary. You have to be moving forward before you can steer, before you can adjust your direction, before you can navigate toward your destination. Life works the same way. You can't steer a parked life. You can't adjust course if you haven't started moving. And you can't access the intuitive guidance of your subconscious mind if you're frozen in perpetual analysis paralysis. So give yourself permission to be imperfect. Give yourself permission to choose without having every answer. Give yourself permission to trust that your subconscious mind, that infinite intelligence working through you, will guide your course corrections along the way. The universe is not a stern teacher waiting to mark your decisions as right or wrong. It's a collaborative partner, ready to work with whatever choices you make, ready to open new doors you couldn't even see from where you're standing now.